So we're in the Beechcraft Baron B58. We're at KBID, Block Island State Airport. This is in the state of Rhode Island, to the east of New York. This is a payware scenery, X-Plane 11, and we're just going to take a bit of a look at it today, from the ground and from the air, and then we're going to take off and fly to another payware scenery. This is just looking at some of the sceneries you can buy for X-Plane. I'm flying with my hardware cockpit, but I'm doing it entirely with the virtual cockpit today, so you can see what we're doing and you can get a good sense of how this scenery really looks in the sim rather than watching it on my screen. So already, what can we say about this airport? Well, it's a very small airport. The apron's modelled quite nicely here. There's a fairly nice ground texture. Those markings look a little bit fat in my experience, but maybe it's like that in real life. We've got a car park modelled there. We've got some stuff lying around, some nicely modelled static aircraft. Don't know what these are. That's probably a King Air of some sort, turboprop aircraft. That, don't know what the Cirrus it says on the side. And what else? There's a Cessna over that. Cessna's taxiing, but that propeller doesn't look right. It's going very slowly, unless that's meant to be a strobe effect. There's another King Air there. And some vegetation in the distance, which looks kind of okay. Looks a little bit tidy and manicured. Let's just take a taxi round. Oh, there's a flock of birds there. That's quite nice. So we've got one, try to avoid that Cessna. We've got one main building modelled here. I guess that's the terminal building. That's not very well modelled. It's kind of cartoony, a little bit plain. The windows they look opaque. Block Island State Airport. There's a hangar there. More stuff lying around. That looks like a Beech Baron parked there. So not too bad. That grass looks very fake and cartoony. That's like Flintstones grass. We're going to run over some birds here. So the grass isn't great. Those trees are already looking kind of suspect as well. I'm going to say more about those when we get in the air. Notice those kind of white, looks like strings hanging from the trees. But as I say, we'll talk about that when we get up in the air. The nicely modelled windsock there, nicely animated. I'm presuming that's giving me a accurate impression of the wind direction. I think I went around that corner a little bit fast. If that wind direction is accurate, then we're going to be taking off right into wind, which is what we need. Runway textures look okay. They're not up to the standard of, an Orbix airport, certainly, or even the Rex airport runway textures, but acceptable. There's a VOR over on the field there, and is that another windsock? Those trees are very regular looking. They look like kind of garden hedges, and they're all very uniform. I wonder what that noise is. There's a sort of swishing noise. Maybe that's the wind. Shouldn't be any problems with crosswind here. Wind's looking straight down the runway. Can get it off there. I say that. There does seem to be a bit of a crosswind component there. And it's kind of bumpy. I'm assuming that's the weather, not anything to do with the aircraft. Get the wheels up. I'm going to come back on my notoriously glitchy props, so this is going to be messy. I've got to get rid of these throttle quads. continuing that climb up to about 2000. I really hate these repeating water textures in X-Plane. You know, it looks like we're over some carpet rather than an ocean. So this is the island, Block Island, and the airport's pretty much in the centre of the island. The whole island's modelled, and it's basically modelled on a photoreal well, I say photoreal, it's photographically derived, shall we say. I think realistic is a word I'm not particularly going to use about it. I'm not too keen on the quality of the photo terrain. It's a little bit washed out looking, although some of that is the conditions today. I mean, we've got a bit of a, well, we had an overcast going. It looks like a kind of a haze layer going at the minute. So that's a photographically derived base with hand-placed autogen on there, so that's trees and buildings. Now I have to say there aren't too many buildings. There's plenty of trees. There seems to be two types of trees. The main dense foliage is this very monotonous, very artificial looking kind of lollipop tree, I would call it. And these are just ranged in swathes and in lines. And those are the dark green trees that you can see. Of course, now we're flying right over the top. You can't see them at all. I'm sorry about this bumpiness, but can't be helped. It's the weather. So you can see some swathes of those lollipop trees down there. In fact, they also look where they're arranged in kind of curves. Find a good example of that. They look like some kind of centipedes or segmented insects. Oh my god, I'm all over the place here. And the other thing you can see is, as I pointed out on the ground, there's some, it looks like shimmering from this altitude, but when we're lower, you know, we're actually seeing, I think what we're seeing is a halo around each individual tree's bitmap. I'm sure this is something to do with the transparency anti-aliasing. I'm sure these trees are created from a bitmap with one transparent colour to cut out the outline of the tree, and we're getting a halo around each one. Now, whether this is something specific to my setup or whether this is endemic to foliage in X-Plane, or it's a feature of this particular scenery, I couldn't say. But all in all, those trees look like crap, if you ask me. So if we run in from this height, you get a better impression of A, the regularity of those trees, B, that thing with the halos around. You know, they all look like they're outlined in white, and if you get close enough, it looks like they've got cobwebs hanging off them. And the uniformity is just far too, you know, they're just far too uniform. It looks like a park. I mean, maybe the island is like one big park and nicely manicured, but it's hard to imagine that's realistic. Just passing the airport here, you can see how limited in scope this airport is. I mean, it's not too bad from here. That 3D grass, by the way, from up here looks just like it's debris, you know, on the field. Looks like there's a lot of stuff lying on the field. We'll come back and do another pass in a minute. Now there's some buildings over here, but by and large this island, although it's got a lot of buildings kind of baked into the photo scenery, most of them don't have 3D autogen buildings on top of them. I mean, the area I'm passing over here, for example, you know, from a height it looks okay because those flat images look like buildings, but low down, you know, it really should have 3D buildings placed on top of it. And one notch down from the maximum world objects setting in X-Plane, but if you put it on maximum as well, it still doesn't fill in all of the 3D buildings. Again, just look at the regularity of those trees up ahead. That's just completely, you know, they look like the, well, you know, they're not very realistic. So what else can we say about this photo terrain on the island? Well, there's not much else to see really, apart from the airport. I mean, we've got a bunch of lagoons, like the one we're coming up to here. There's some water traffic, which is okay, you know, adds a little bit of atmosphere. And it is animated, if that makes a difference. But very little in the way of actual modelling down here. I suppose close in those shorelines look okay, but not much in the way of jetties and buildings. Well, in fact, hardly any buildings. There's a jetty coming up too, in fact, but they're just barely modelled. So really all that's this island's got going for it is the airport. And if we take another pass over the airport before we depart to our destination, again, just to emphasise, it's very limited in what's depicted. And this photo terrain around the airport's barely populated with any buildings either. Got a single runway, very few buildings, got those static aircraft that we looked at earlier, and that horrid 3D grass, and a couple of fences, and that's it. So that's what you get for $20. But what we're going to do now is we're going to head off to the west and see what we can see at the destination airport. If we dial in the Sandy Point VOR 117.8, I think I should have that already. Yeah, I have that set already. So we dial in 261, or let's just go for 260. Make sure we've got the HSI slaved to nav 1. Then we're going to put in nav hold. We're now established on that outbound 261 course from the VOR. That should take us right along the south shore. This is Long Island. We've got about 45 miles to go. Terrain's pretty featureless down here. Well, not featureless, but it's, you know, the features aren't very interesting. There's no high ground. Everything's pretty flat here. Right, we've got 6 miles to run and we can't see a damn thing, but we've got to slow down. Slow right down. I think we're going to descend slightly. It'll just come off that autopilot. It's not doing what I need it to do. This is really not VFR. Shouldn't be trying to land in this, but we'll give it a go. We should only be 3 miles to run. Alright, we should be good. I can see the field. Thought I could see the field, lost it now. there's the wires. Well, there's the field. Bit of a plummet. Well, that was kind of hairy and a bit last minute. So we didn't get to see much of this airstrip from the air, but we'll wait till the weather clears up and then we'll take off and have a bit better look at it later on. Okay, so we've hung around and the weather's cleared up a bit, so we're just going to take a bit of a look at this airport, both at ground level and a little bit from the air, by way of comparison with Block Island. This is Spadaro 1N2 airport, which is on Long Island. We're about 50 miles to the east of JFK, and we're also about 50 miles or 60 miles in fact to the west of where we started, Block Island. So we'll take a look. That's a nice windsock again. These might be default X-plane airfield items that are being used here, because that looks like the windsock that we saw at Block Island as well. This is a different vendor that's made this. Taxiing on the rough I think this counts as rough rather than runway. That's why it's rocking and rolling here. X-plane very much overplays the roughness of the non-airfield surfaces. We've got some nicely, the runway's nicely distressed. We've got some nice dirt alongside. I want to take it easy along here because there's a lot to see. We've got 3D grass again, but those runway markings are by and large better than the ones we saw at the other airfield. The 3D grass, I have to say, is somewhat better as well. It's a little bit more convincing, not as clumped. Got some bits and pieces here, cones, some nice looking hangers. I can't look and steer at the same time, so sorry about that. And we've got some nice customized foliage there. Let me just stop while I'm talking about this for a little while. Again, looks like custom trees. These trees are much better than the ones we saw on Block Island. These are deciduous trees of some sort. This is basically I think a ultralight, parachutes, gliders, banner towing, that kind of thing. In fact, this is a very strange setup. We've got two airports back to back, or side by side. This is Spadaro 1N2. We've got Lufker, which is 49N, right next door. Lufker, this is obviously an asphalt strip. We've got a turf strip right next door, and we should be able to taxi between them. I think that might be the taxiway there. So we'll go over and yeah, we'll take a look at that in a second. But this is a really nicely done. Down this end, again, we've got some nice runway markings there. We've got a displaced threshold. Really lovely attention to the detail of the dirt. Here we've got some nice static aircraft. Some of the vicinity of this airport's modelled as well. Not very much, I have to say. You know, if you're familiar with Orbix, you get a lot of Orbix strips have got a substantial amount of the immediate vicinity of the airfield modelled as well. This one you get some, notably, we can't really see it from here, but across the street there we're right on the edge of the street here, and we do have some of the buildings and the retail units across the street, which you'll see better from the air. Nice junk models here as well. Got a boat over there, bicycle, bunch of cars, some nice signage. Let's again, we're taxiing on this rough stuff, which is kind of not working great. My frames are a bit glitchy as well here today. I don't know what that is. So let's see if we can taxi across to the other strip, and we'll just take a look at that as well. I'm going to get that rock and roll effect taxiing on the dirt. Just noticing my flaps are down actually. Need to get those back in. Let's see, is this the taxiway? This looks like the taxiway. No, that guy needs to get out of the way. I've got to say the figures, the human traffic isn't done to great effect. That was a kind of a Roblox looking guy. Oops, need to watch where I'm going. Game got nice, you know, not going over the top, but nice weathering on the buildings, nice attention to the foliage here. This grass strip is, I don't think it's quite as attractive as the hard strip in terms of the ground textures. It looks a little bit fake when you get up close to it. But again, it's got some nice, populated with some nice static models. I don't like that glitching though. I don't know what's going on here. So let's taxi out onto the... Oh, it looks like you can maybe... Can we taxi around there? We'll probably taxi around there as well. We're not going to do that. Let's taxi out onto the grass. What's the windsock? No, actually, let's go up to the end here. We actually want to be taking off in this direction, looking at the windsock. So we need to backtrack down to the other end. Nice airport tow truck there. Yeah, you can see across the street better from here. Madison Park, electronic service, car audio, Italian restaurant, dance and dance, chiropractic, Kathy's Deli, accountant services, healthy spa, under the rainbow. Under the rainbows. Taxi a bit far there. So let's taxi up to the other end, and we'll think about taking off and having a look from the air. I've got to say, this is much better quality than the Block Island scenery. I'm not sure why we've got cars driving onto the runway, but maybe that's all above board. Everything's looking a bit bright and sunny at the minute. You know, when we came in earlier, obviously things were looking a lot more drab. You know, you could make an argument for the saturation being kind of overkill with the colour palette, but I think it looks nice. Right, so let's just slow down a bit and turn around here. It looks like maybe you could taxi around that way as well, onto the other strip. So there's plenty of room for this aircraft in principle. It's a 2300 foot strip. Of course the weather would make a difference, you know, if the ground's waterlogged. Alright, let's get out of here. We'll just do a quick takeoff and a zoom around. We're going more or less into wind. Having to give it some left rudder there. Oh, now right rudder. Okay, that was a little bit higgledy-piggledy, shall we say. Get the wheels in. Get the flaps in. Get the power back. Get the props back. Whoops, a little bit. Oh, those blinking props are like mad. It's obviously much clearer than it was earlier when we came in. We'll just go out a little bit. Like we'll start a wide circle. Keep it in a climb for a minute, get up to about 1,000 feet. Maybe 1,500. So we're hooking it back around. There's the field up to the top left. And you can see we've got some of the vicinity modelled. Close to the airport. Particularly that patch of ground out the left window right now. Let's stick at about this height. Well, we're about 1,100 feet. We've also got some of the road modelled in the immediate vicinity and some fields that we can use as landmarks. This nice road junction just off the left quarter here, that's a good landmark for coming into the airfield. What else? Again, that highway comes in, then there's a kind of intersection. I think the other road's just below to the left there. So that junction's quite a good landmark. If I just tip over, we can have a look at it closer. Bit of photoreal ground scenery there. That leads us nicely into the hard strip, which is in the immediate foreground, and you can see the dirt strip that we took off from, sorry, the grass strip is more or less parallel. They both run north-south, and I think the grass strip is a little bit longer and substantially wider, so putting it down on that isn't quite as hard. Of course, in real life, stopping on that would be a little bit tougher. We've got some fairly dense foliage just below us there. We're just going over the top of it. Now again, it doesn't look super real, but compared to that aggregate foliage we saw at Block Island, I mean, that's just so much better. Now the edge of this photoreal vicinity is really quite close in. I'm pretty sure that's what we're looking at here. So you don't get a whole lot for your dollars. In common with a lot of X-plane strips, it's kind of hard to spot these strips from the air, and I think that's good. I mean, that's a realistic feature. You know, if they're too easy to spot from the air, as is the case with a lot of FSX strips, whether they're native strips or add-on strips, you know, it's very unrealistic. So here we are. We'll just do a bit of a low pass down the runway. We can see some buildings. I think that's that, yeah, some buildings off to the right of the strip that are going to pass by. Well, we're not going to go down the strip here. We're going to kind of parallel it. Again, there's a few buildings modelled there, but not a great deal. It looks kind of nice from the air. So there it is, Block Island State KBID from Pilot Plus, available in the xplane.org store, $19.95. In my estimation, this is a mediocre piece of payware at best. From ground level, there's barely anything to choose between this and the default X-plane scenery. From altitude, okay, it looks better, it's got better foliage, and we do have a photoreal base, but honestly it's just not that interesting. There's nothing much to do or see, and I would say it's not worth $1. And then we have Lufker-49N and Spadaro 1N2 from Nimbus Simulations, also available on the X-Plane store, xplane.org store. Cheaper than Block Island, $15.95, and just a much better presented package all in all. The ground modeling's fantastic, looks great from up here, looks just as good from ground level. We get a modest helping of photoreal scenery in the immediate vicinity. Not a great deal, it has to be said, but it's an interest, above all it's an interesting airfield. It's very challenging to well, it's two airfields, as I said, very challenging to land and at times take off from. That's either strip. Got nice complementary aspects with the very narrow hard strip and the significantly wider soft strip. Some great modelling of static aircraft and junk, and you know, the foliage is more appropriate. You know, there's a tendency to compare everything to Orbix, and this is not, I mean, I'm going to say it's not up to Orbix standard, but it's pretty close, particularly in terms of the modelling of the surface terrains. You know, all this mud and dirt and the blending of the strip and the distressed edges to the hard strip. So yeah, Lufker and Spadaro if you're up for flying in the New York vicinity. Well worth a look, and at $15.95 you can't go wrong.